If you don't ask, you don't get. And I think a lot of small business owners right now are so focused on surviving, they're forgetting about succeeding. I was asked by Ron to speak about some of the challenges of being a small business owner with or without COVID and the path forward for growth. And I thought it'd be a good discussion to have. So please, I don't necessarily mean to talk at you. If you have questions and I can't see you, just pop yourself in. But I do think that the backbone of the US economy are small businesses and entrepreneurs. And I do think we get the least amount of respect, right? We drive the economy, but we don't get the funding opportunities. Right now during COVID, that has affected many small businesses whose banks didn't help them either with the PPP program. The bigger banks were much more interested in banking inappropriate recipients, which you've seen many headlines about than their local small businesses. So that drove a lot of business to local banks and community banks, which on one level is great, but if you're in the middle of a crisis and you're a business owner, it's super frustrating to switch your bank and apply for PPP and survive. They also don't get the same level of line of credit. So that has affected a lot of the small business owners we know. You also don't get the board opportunities with or without COVID. I used to be a Fortune 100 corporate vice president, and I ran a very large billion-dollar P&L for a major defense company. And then I started my own business, and here I have been for 14 years. And I can tell you with all fairness and certainty, I am a much better executive having run a small business for 14 years than I was as a Fortune 100 vice president. And as a woman, even in the Fortune 100, I made vice president, in 2004, which was a long time ago, way before #MeToo. And for the minorities and women on the call, it was a very different experience then than it is now. But as a business owner, I'm much more sophisticated and nuanced in my understanding of the challenges of business, but I don't get the same board of directors opportunities that my peers do who are running P&Ls or, line organizations in the Fortune 1000, 5000, but I'm better qualified than a lot of them. So I think small business owners don't get the respect by society, but we drive it, right? We don't get the banking, we don't get the credit support, we don't get assistance with major governmental programs. We don't get the board opportunities. We don't get representation the same way large businesses do. And I'm going to talk about all this and from a what do we do about it and how do we deal with it perspective, not just discuss the challenges, but also talk about what we've done and how we help businesses get past this. But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, is infamous for only caring about large business. And yes, we have local chambers, and yes, they're small business groups. But I think a 401k is a great example of this. For the first 7 years of our business, we couldn't have one because of things like matching and the top-heavy provision, right? And I think there's no one legislating for us. Those provisions were written into law for employees to be protected at companies like Walmart or Lockheed Martin. They weren't for companies that are small real estate, construction, home loan, five and dime, dry cleaner companies. And so we talk about having a savings crisis in America, but we don't legislate to allow small business owners to save, right? And to allow their employees to save. And from a talent awareness perspective, sometimes we find ourselves competing for the very best talent coming either out of university, mostly, or out of a master's program because they think, oh, we need the big brand. We need to work at Google. But oftentimes they end up back at our firm instead because of the things small business owners do provide, which are better cultures, better quality of life, passion and concern for their clientele, more of a personal environment. And, I also think from a marketing perspective, the only company I'm aware of that really sincerely seems to care about small business that's a large company is American Express. And they have prohibitive fees for small business. So you're often in this circumstance as a small business owner where you're fighting an uphill battle against all these sort of invisible factors that make a difference, and you also have to grow. And that's a very hard thing. You're competing for clients and you're not getting the same resources, funding, marketing support, legislative support And it's often like the painting the scream, where you don't know what to do. You have that scream mentality of, I have to make payroll. People depend on me, my family, my employees, my organization, my community, but I'm not getting all this help, but I'm the backbone of the economy. So how can I focus on growth? And that's where we come in. We work with, as Ron said, very large businesses. We also work with pre-revenue businesses, but I can tell you, as the redhead in the room and the expert in growth, that growth is a mindset, it is a mentality, and it is always an uphill battle. Whether you're at a large company or you're a small business entrepreneur. And if you decide to invest in yourself and in growth, and you fight for yourself and you help each other, you can not just survive through COVID, you can succeed. And there is a difference. And focus and confidence and self-assurance, all of which you've had to start your own business, to be in this circumstance to begin with, is what's going to carry you through, not just through survival, but to success. And right now is a really crucial time for small business owners. You read in the papers every day, oh, thousands of us are going out of business. And yes, many of us are struggling, but many of us are surviving. And you don't hear those stories, and you don't hear about all the really creative things that as an organizational group, right, as small business owners, we've had to do, not just to protect our base, but to continue to enhance it. And, I have a couple tips. I met with locally this week, a group of DC-based catering and event and restaurant people who are really struggling, right? One of my really dear friends owns what was a $25 million a year catering business. And right now she has massive cash flow issues. She's got like 5 employees left, right? And everyone was talking about reinvention. But one of the biggest things that we've all brought to the table is the idea that you can help each other, work together, right? So I sit on the board of the Greater Executive, the executive board of the Greater Washington Board of Trade, and I sit on the executive board. And we suggested that at their meetings, which could no longer be in person, we send catered lunches. We have the budget for food because they were all in-person meetings. So what we're doing is we're sending a menu in advance, and we're sending catered lunches to these people's homes, right? And the catering company is willing to deliver them for free in the National Capital Region, and they're getting the money, right? We're helping them by giving them an event that is small, right? But it also touches CEOs of these big companies. We're trying very hard to horizontally leverage each other's connections to help other owners think out of the box. And at Growth Period, we're much more of a process-driven organization. Growth is an art and a science, and we don't believe in luck because it's not repeatable. So we have a lot of processes and a lot of algorithms and a lot of databases and a lot of things we do, but none of it matters without the relationships. So now is the time to really leverage your relationships. I also, with my family, own a local ice cream store called Sprinkles in Potomac, Maryland, the Village. And I encourage you all to come by, right, and have some ice cream or candy or pies. And we sell pies, and we sell holiday pies. And so we put together this year a marketing campaign. We did it ourselves, and I'm not a marketer, right? I'm a grower. There's a vast difference between marketing and growing, but they are related. And we sent it out to every single person. Each of the owners, there's 3 of us, my husband and myself and another person knew, and all of our staff knew. And we basically said, support a small business and buy a pie. You're gonna buy a pie anyway, because every American largely does, right? And we sell them in all these different flavors and gluten-free and vegan and anything you need. Give thought to giving the business to someone who's local. And it's amazing the response we got. Amazing. People saying, well, we didn't realize we could do that. And you're cheaper than, Safeway, or you have better ingredients or better quality. And, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I think a lot of small business owners right now are so focused on surviving, they're forgetting about succeeding. And you have to keep both eyes on the wheel. You can't just focus on getting day by day by. You're never going to get out of it, because it's going to be about 1.5 years before things are really better. And that's if we get through the election without a civil war, which I think is sadly for America, a strong possibility that there'll be massive violence. And I have friends whose businesses are boarded up in DC in anticipation of this. And how do you deal with that? So you have to go online, you have to change your focus. And these are really hard things. And you should ask people like me or other people in your network who are experts at growth. How am I having the best year ever? Our firm is literally in 14 years having the best year we've ever had financially, which freaks me out for next year, because if I don't do as well, then when I go to the bank for renewal of our credit, they're going to see, instead of a hockey stick, a dip. And they're going to forget that there was COVID and there were other reasons, right? And they're going to say, well, why'd you go down? Right? So it puts a different kind of inherent stress on you as a small business owner. Whereas they look at Microsoft and they don't care, so you have to kind of work through these things. You have to work your peer network. You have to use NABOE and your other groups to help not just sustain you, but grow you. And if you don't know how, somebody else does. So it's like the catering group we were with this week, this Biz Bash, I think is what they're calling themselves, right? They put together all of these different kind of at-home services by putting together boxes, and we're going to contribute at Sprinkles, where you can get a meal in a box and it'll have our ice cream, but someone else's bread and someone else's coffee product. And these are things we've never done before. And they're all great ideas, but you have to be willing to be flexible and you have to get past your fear. The number one reason I started Growth Period, and I left the Fortune really 50, and I made vice president for the women out there. I made vice president in the Fortune 50 in defense at 32 years old. And I looked like a girl even from behind. So it was really frightening to a lot of people there, right? That I was this young girl who looked like a girl, right? And I had red hair and I was friendly. Oh my goodness gracious. The only thing worse is I'm not sure what. If I had had, an alien come out of my head, I think they would have been less surprised. And fundamentally, what I learned is fear is the driving culture behind a lot of corporate America. And I left and started my own business, became an entrepreneur because I was tired of the mistake in corporate America being what mattered, not the intent behind it. I wanted to create a company where the culture was the intent mattered, not the mistake, that there wasn't fear. And I employ people who range literally from 18 years old all the way to 76. Whereas there was this sort of age demographic of like 22 to 60, and that was acceptable. And everyone else didn't count, right? And the older you got, the less valuable you were, unless you're already in that hierarchy. You have to surmount your fear. I started a business to surmount fear as a culture. Right now, it's a very scary time in our nation. You've got COVID, you've got recession in a very strange way. And you have a presidential election, which is vastly unsettling. And I don't really care how you vote, it's unsettling. Yes, we have blueberry pie. But I can see you, Bill Rosick. But you have to transcend fear right now, fear of not surviving. You have to find a way to reach beyond it to what enabled you and motivated you to take that risk to begin with. And believe in yourself enough and use your network enough to remember, if you don't grow, you die. Survival isn't enough. Because you're going to also get judged by the banks and everyone else on how you did. It is social Darwinism, and it shouldn't be dog eat dog and everyone's wearing milk bone underpants, right? It should be let's help each other. And I think people are feeling very isolated, not just because of the quarantine and the PPE and all of that nonsense, but because local banks aren't helping. And clients are angry. I can tell you, I mean, we're an ice cream store and people come in really angry. And I'm like, well, if you're mean to us right now, right? Because we're supposed to be your happy place. You have to work through the anger and the fear and come up with a process for growth. Write down your growth goals, not just your survival goals. And you could be sitting there saying, well, sure, what does she care? I'm barely surviving, I'm barely hanging in there. I do care, but I'm telling you, if you don't focus on other things, survival doesn't matter. Survive and stay optimistic. You need to believe in yourself. You need to prove to yourself, your employees, and your family that you believe in your future. Because that was the whole point of starting your business anyway. Go back to the basic of believing in you. And if there is a market for what you do, the market will be there. trying other ways to get to the other side. I'm going to pause here, Ron, much to your horror, and see if anyone wants to do what my 4-year-old calls chatties. I don't know if anyone has questions or comments, or I can talk forever. I'm extroverted.
One of the things, Courtney, that always fascinates me this year, and I've mentioned it in many of our meetings, is the new buzzword pivoting and what companies have done to pivot. It fascinates me what companies have done to say, okay, I can't do business like I used to. So how do I quit, or do I figure out another way to do it? And there's some interesting stories out there.
So I love the word pivot and I hate it at the same time, because you don't all have to pivot and you don't all have to reinvent yourself. Mm-hmm. What you may have to do is rethink first principles, right? And figure out what your priorities should be that got lost because you were booming and now you're, holding. But I do think pivoting does matter for some industries, not for alcohol. Yes, for catering, right? And I think, again, pivoting doesn't mean you go from catering to offering at-home sculpture services, right? It's taking your strengths, figuring out the gap in the market for them, and how to take advantage of it as an opportunity. And that takes, again, confidence and absence of fear. It's not so much reinvention as it is you 2.0, mm-hmm. right? Or your business 2020. And it may be that that's just the way the world is. I think right now, if you're a commercial real estate owner, my opinion as a grower is you better pivot, because a lot of people aren't coming back. So you better find a way to attract people to your building. And that's a pivot, right? Whether it's all of a sudden garage parking is free or whatever it is, right? You put in a daycare center or whatever, right? But if you are a printing store, or, it's very hard to pivot from a printing store that does invitations for weddings to, a mechanic. I mean, you have to think about why there was a market for you to begin with, and then figure out who to team up with. I was with a makeup artist yesterday she didn't work for 6 months. I mean, who's going to events, who needs makeup, right? And she had come to me as a friend for some advice, and I had hooked her up with some TV stations that I knew. And she started to offer at-home makeup work, in like a hazmat suit, for God's sakes, to TV anchors. And she was basically saying, I'll do it as contract work. Like, you don't have to pay me what we're paying these big services. And, now she's doing lessons online for people who are at home and want the date night and want to look. I mean, you have to work with your strengths and what you've got. She's also gone back to school to get her degree as an esthetician. So that is a pivot, right, at a very small level. But it's not, she went from that to becoming, a computer programmer. You've got to work with who you are and what you've got, because otherwise you're going to stress yourself out so much trying to be something else that your basic business won't survive at all. At least that's our experience.
I think you're absolutely right on, and you actually said a few things that made me feel really good, because NABOE was founded on the fact that, to me, the chambers weren't doing their job. And what was sad about the chambers, the U.S. Chamber led the outsourcing of jobs to other countries with NAFTA and other things. And we just lost our manufacturing, and it was backed by the chamber, which was insane. But where that comes from, if you cater to just the largest companies in the country, you're going to get that. You're going to get that issue of outsourcing and finding the cheapest labor possible. What is nice about what you also said was working with local businesses. And I started out today talking about the sponsors working together. One of the things that we try to reinforce in NABOE is everybody should be doing business locally with people that you meet locally. You're going to get better service, better quality, and you're helping the local community. So thank you for saying that. We will, for questions, Dea Neff and Reed Sandridge, would you scour the chat box? If you all would put your questions in chat, I'll have either Dea or Reed call your name, and then you can ask the question. But why don't you go ahead and start putting questions in for Courtney on this.
I will say, Ron, you know, the conversation we've had recently is the local chambers, right? And I like all the people who run them, and I know them all in the region. Okay, they're all good people, but how effective are they, right? I mean, I feel like right now, and I'm not trying to go to war with the chambers at all. I'm members of all of them, and I contribute, whether it's for Sprinkles or Growth Period or other businesses we own. But I feel like the chambers from the US on down have sort of lost sight of the fact that they're supposed to represent a constituency, not just get dues and money. And I'm not really sure what my local chamber, even for Sprinkles, is doing, except passing out coupons for us. That's really bringing us together as a group and being a leader in terms of putting things together. If small businesses could come together and have a voice, regardless of your priority in the local community, it's a very powerful thing. In the Potomac Shopping Center, where my ice cream store is, there's a market called River Falls Market, owned by a wonderful man and his wife named Jim McWhorter. And he came to us and said, look, it occurred to me, we're buying our ice cream from this huge, and this was a year ago, huge supplier, you know, and they're late and they're sloppy and I have billing issues, and you're sitting around the corner and you're always helpful and friendly and nice. Why aren't I selling your, right? And so that's been a huge thing for, I mean, it was great. I mean, for us, what to him is a small order, for us is a big one. And we also sell his chocolate covered strawberries. You know, the cross-selling hasn't hurt either one of us. It's made us stronger, and it's made us team together, and we've bought technology together now as partners. So instead of one of us getting a printer label, you know, machine and the other one getting a printer label machine, we're splitting the costs of infrastructure that are necessary for two food businesses, right, that are complementary. And then the local hairdresser came and said, well, we heard that you were doing this and you're always nice and friendly, and maybe we could do a promotion with you, get your hair cut here, get an ice cream at Sprinkles. You know, I'm just saying, the more neighborly you are, the more creative you are, the more likely you are to get through this, because you're creating other distribution and sales channels for yourself. And the people who are obnoxious, the people who are rude, the people who have been mean, they're being left out. So how you treat people also matters. It really does. I can't begin to tell you. We were just at a magazine shoot this week for Sprinkles, and we and a bunch of other businesses in Potomac are going to be on the cover of this magazine. And I asked the editor and publisher how they picked the businesses, and she said, candidly, we picked the people we liked. So being nice matters. At Growth Period, our business, my main business, right? We tell people all the time, a lot of business development comes down to fundamental relationships and manners, saying thank you, writing thank you notes, doing follow-up, investing in more than just what can you do for me. Growth Period teaches people processes that are repeatable and consistent that help drive growth. And growth, as I said before, is an art and a science, and there is a science part of it. If you are, as a small business, only getting business because you're lucky, you're missing a huge part of the market. And there is a science to that that allows you to be in a position to continue that process, regardless of how small your network is. And that's a lot of what we do.
I've got a question for you. I know a big part of your business is mergers and acquisitions. And I was just wondering, where do you see the opportunities coming in 2021 for acquisitions?
Well, if you're going to be a buyer, it's an entirely different conversation than if you're going to be a seller. If you're a buyer, you need to start very much like dating. We use a lot of, at Growth Period, we use a lot of dating analogies. Mm-hmm. You need a profile, kind of like online dating, right? You need a profile of your ideal target, and you better be sure that that profile includes an EBITDA range and a multiple that you can afford and you can get financed. And I think what you're going to find is that a lot of small businesses are desperately going to be trying to sell. There's not going to be a buyer. A lot of them aren't going to take the time to hire companies like us to put together. On the M&A side, we put together sort of a presentation package for you to take out to potential buyers, right? We're not a broker dealer. We do diligence and we do growth to exit plans, and we help you put together a presentation to show how you can sell. But you need a story. And I think a lot of small businesses are going to hurt from that. I think on the buy side, if you have that profile, you've got to stick to it and do real diligence, right? I think there will be an uptick, and there already has been, in federal M&A. Companies and private equity sponsors and strategic buyers and family offices buying companies with government contracts because it's stable revenue and the government pays. And so it's not necessarily always the highest margin, but it's a consistent one. I think if you're a seller, you better have a value proposition, and you're going to have to be able to explain how you didn't just survive during COVID, but how you had growth, or how you're compensating for growth in 2021 and 2022. And I think that's very hard for a small business that doesn't get external help. I saw that Kay was asking, and I can't say enough about Kay Lowry and what a great job she does as a business dietitian. I work with her.
Kay, you're off mute if you'd like to ask some questions.
Yes. Well, the question I wanted to ask, and thank you so much. This is another side of you that I am very much enjoying learning about. And so just basic questions. Who do you help? What kinds of clients do you take on? What's your ideal client? You just were talking about, helping others with their ideal client. So I'm just curious who you help.
Well, we have 3 services. We help companies when work with other companies and with the government, right? And not just our government, but foreign governments. And we also do M&A work, right? Where we do diligence on your funnel, your growth pipeline with your customers, or we help you put together a growth to exit strategy, or we help you put together a presentation to get through, a management presentation to be bought. And then the third is we own Potomac Recruiting. So we do executive retained talent. So it depends, searches, recruiting. It depends on which vertical. Really, our ideal client is somebody who has the management perspective that growth is worth investing in, and they understand there's no low-hanging fruit in the world at all. That even if you catch a piece of low-hanging fruit, it's not going to be there tomorrow because you already snatched it. Mm-hmm. So you have to have realistic expectations. So for us, it's not about the size of the company. It's not about what you do. I mean, we can sell ice to the Alaskans in January and get a thank you note from them. I mean, we're closers, right? This is what we do, and we're really good closers. We're professional closers. So it's about who we're dealing with. And we like working with everyone from small business entrepreneurs to large ones. It's all about whether you get it. And are you an obstructionist to your own growth? It's really, it's more of a psychological profile, okay? Mm-hmm. Is so much revenue in so many industries.
I will tell you today what I'm seeing far beyond what I've ever seen before, but such a strong interest across the board with small business owners who are doing well under COVID, where they're looking for acquisitions coming out of it now into 2021. And we've turned a lot of our focus in CEO focus. My coaching is to how to go about identify and secure other businesses going forward. I've never seen anything like it. The opportunities are there. It's a matter of many will not do some of the things that you talked about doing, and their companies are going to falter. Others are out there really in many cases reinventing themselves and doing very well under COVID. Those are the people. They're going to be the acquirers going forward. So it's going to be an interesting world in 2021.
Look, there are also banks that are really helpful. Old Dominion Bank has been helpful, in my opinion. M&T Bank has been very helpful. There are local banks that also have really worked during this period of time, or more regional banks, to reach out and say, hey, we get that you're our constituency and work with us. I think somebody was asking a question about how do you differentiate yourselves?
Yeah, I've unmuted Landon if he wants to ask it.
Hi, Courtney. Landon here. So, my firm is in the process of the dating stage and speaking to other firms that are selling, but the problem that we're running into is that there's an average of 50 buyers to one seller, and so they have the advantage. And so it's how do we differentiate ourselves to stick out and get to that final three firms that they'd like to speak to.
Well, again, you have to know who your buyer should be. It's a little bit, again, like dating. If you like tall, intellectual people to date, you don't go to the mall, you go to the library, right? So if you have a profile as a buyer, as a seller, you should have a profile of who your ideal buyer is. And then you've got to work backwards to get in front of them. And it's not always through a group process. You know, you can hire small business brokers. You can work with firms like us who can put together a presentation where we know what we're doing and we can help you be differentiated. But again, it's also figuring out who can buy you. And a lot of times as a small business, sadly, you have to do that yourself or work with a consulting firm like ours to help figuring out, because the broker dealers, the larger broker dealers, they don't want to spend the time because the fee they're going to get on the back end doesn't warrant in their mind the investment to say, hey, these are your ideal buyers. But there shouldn't be, unless you're something extraordinary, necessarily 50 ideal buyers for one seller. I mean, if you're selling, you should be able to narrow that down, just like you can narrow down when you're dating. If there's 50 fabulous people in front of you, everyone's going to rank them differently. Doesn't mean they're all not equally fabulous. It's just what you view as your number one most attractive match isn't necessarily what mine will be, right? And so you have to do some work yourself and figure out what's a fit. Does that make sense to you, Landon?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Of course. I mean, none of this is easy. I think, it's so much harder to be a small business owner because there's no real manual that isn't, I think, somewhat sophomoric, right? These are real challenges everyone has. And one of the things that I think is important is to be honest with each other, about your strengths and your weaknesses and what differentiate you and how you implement and how you execute and, what you invest in, and should you be investing in yourself more? And that's an important thing. If you're going to sell, you need to know who you are in order to articulate your identity in a way that is attractive to someone else.
Terrific. You had mentioned M&T Bank, and in our audience, I have Eric Myers, who's with M&T Bank. Eric is my go-to banker for small businesses. And Eric, if you just wanted to give a little shout out, tell everybody how to get in touch with you. While other banks have held back and are not lending, M&T Bank is still lending. They did an unbelievably terrific job in the PPP loans. Eric, you've got your 30 seconds.
Thanks, Ron. And thanks for the shout out, Courtney. I appreciate it. We did 37,000 PPP loans. Most of them were under $150,000. That's basically 5 years of normal loan production for our bank, 6 weeks, with some late hours for sure, but it was all worth it for us.
Eric, give my very best to Cecilia. She's fantastic.
Oh, absolutely will. Absolutely will. For the rest of you, Cecilia runs our market. she's the big boss.
Yeah, she's my dear friend.
Good. So we are lending conventionally. We're actually the #1 SBA lender in the DC area. And believe it or not, #5 in the country, and we're not even cover the whole country. We get small business, and we're open for business right now. I just got a loan approval yesterday for, believe it or not, commercial investment real estate. It made sense.
It's a good time to buy.
So we're doing it. Right.
There's problems that surmount all of, that transcend all of us. I think it's important to also talk to each other. When we were going through the PPP process, we talked to a lot of the other small business owners that we knew, and many of them were struggling. And luckily, we are well connected growers, and we were approved in the first round and got it through. But we were able to go forward to those other owners and unsolicited send them an email saying, here are the 5 banks, or here are the 3 banks, or here's the 2 bankers, Cecilia being at the very top of that, who actually helped us, right? So we shared resources, and there was nothing in it for us. It's not like M&T Bank was gonna, decorate our lobby. It was, we understood that we have a responsibility to each other as a community to help, and we took it seriously and did something about it. And Cecilia Hodges is great at M&T Bank. I can't say enough really good things about her. And she does, M&T Bank sponsors this iHeartRadio spotlight, which they've had me on and other small business owners. And she's been very good about recognizing that small business CEOs matter just as much as having our dear friends who run Fortune 1000 companies.
Yeah. Especially locally, small businesses employ more people than large businesses, period, as a group.
Yeah.
And I think
I saw.
Got a question. Bruce, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Good morning, everyone. How are you all doing?
Terrific.
Yeah.
During your talk, one of the things that we find with our firm, we deal with clients as far as risk management and accumulation protection. And for our business owners, a lot of times we find that they are looking to sell their business or plan for what their next phase of life is going to be. How are you advising clients who are looking for M&A or exit planning in dealing with the fact that they're in the middle of COVID, their valuations may not be what they were 6 months, 12 months ago, or just not probably evaluating them at all? A lot of times we find that they over-evaluate what they think their business is worth, or they're not, or they're forgetting that they are the business.
I mean, in terms of businesses dealing with valuation, and are they evaluating their businesses with the proper mindset, which is what you're asking me. First of all, you have to get real, right? It's not last year at this time. It's not 2 years ago at this time. The economy is volatile. It's very high and then it's very low. People have less access to capital. You have to have a really good sense of what your valuation should be. And you should know that from working in your industry, but if you don't know what the multiple is for valuation for your industry, you can ask people like me, ask bankers, ask M&A lawyers, right? So like many women who own small businesses, I ran home to mama when I started it and started a services business. In retrospect, I should have started a dog food production company. I'd be a billionaires, right? By now, services businesses don't carry high multiples in general. Now, of course, are there exceptions? Sure there are. And it depends what the services are. It's different if you're, physical therapist than if you're construction, than if you're ice cream, than if you're consulting, right? But you have to keep it real. And then you have to use real math. I mean, if you don't have a great CPA, if you don't have somebody who understands valuation, if you don't know your run rate, if you don't understand your EBITDA, I'm not really sure what you're doing in business, but if you're surviving anyway, get an accountant, get a CPA who deals with transactions and have them do a multiple for you. With small businesses, it depends on your definition of small business. I had lunch with a woman yesterday who owns a small business government contracting firm. And I've encouraged her to run through a process with a big strategic who's interested in her profile, a profile of a business like that. And she may not sell to them, but they're going to level set what she can get. So sometimes you have to work the process to get somebody to tell you for free what you don't know. Is that helpful, Bruce?
Oh, it is. And I mean, we run into the same thing. We're trying to educate at the same time. And so we find a lot of times some of them just over-evaluate or are not real or they haven't really gone through that process. So they're just trying to figure out how do they go to that process, whom other than ourselves who are doing it from a risk management aspect, who else can help them as far as evaluating it, especially for small business owners who may be a small consultant where they are the business and they want to be able to, exit because they want to retire and say, well, how do I get X for my business? And you kind of have to do a core value of it for them and say, well, this is what it looks like. It looks like from us from a insurance aspect, but you may want to talk to an M&A person that's dealing it from, merging it or having someone purchase it, or is the business even a business that one wants to purchase?
I agree with all that.
I see Mark, I'm not sure that's a question or a comment, but Mark McLinden, if you want to make your comment, and then we'll get Courtney's response. And we'll conclude with Mark because of timing. Mark?
Yeah.
Unmute, Mark.
He may have stepped away.
All right.
Well, in terms of Mark's comment, right, he talked about important differentiators, our culture, communication, and compassion. I mean, yes, that's true for your business. And it's true in terms of your ability to retain your employees, which is a factor. Succession and retention do factor into mergers and acquisitions, regardless of your size. But the reality is most buyers, unless they're special, really don't care about that. They care about financials. And that kind of plays into overall, if you are good to your people, your business should be doing better and you should be retaining, your talent. But sadly, in today's world, these characteristics, which I find personally as a human being to be very important, and as an employer I value, don't matter as much to people who are necessarily acquiring you. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have them. It's just not going to be a selling point that's going to drive the transaction. And I want to take the moment, because I do have to run, I have to get to an airport and catch a flight, to thank you all and to thank Kay Lowry and Ron in particular for having me. And it's really been a pleasure to speak with and interact with all of you. And if I can ever be of any service, please let me know. It's nice to meet all of you, and I'm really wishing you all the best, not just for survival, but for success going forward.